Greetings, Guardians, my name is Bife here. The Ghosts of the Deep dungeon from the Season of the Deep provides us with some of the first true insights into the nature of Xivu Arath. Today, we're going to explore that story a little more in depth, and we're going to examine all of the calcified fragments, the collectibles that drop little bits of dialogue from Xivu. Taking a closer look at all of this is hopefully going to give us a better understanding of the nature of the Hive God of War and what her current state and temperament is. It should be noted that whilst we've already had a fair degree of third-person accounts and lore surrounding Xivu Arath, these calcified fragments are almost unique. They provide some of the first few contemporary accounts of Xivu Arath from outside of the Books of Sorrows, and perhaps more importantly, the accounts that were stolen in the Books of Sorrows are not only old, but they are contextualized by being surrounded by other third-person accounts and retellings of her story. However, there are moments here and now where we hear the voice of the God of War directly. We hear in her tone the way that she is feeling, as well as seeing the words that she has spoken. These fragments in particular are important because the perspective of the God of War here is revealed, and it shows what she feels of the last 10 or so years of history in Sol, including her reactions to events such as the fall of her brother Oryx and the betrayal of her sister, Savathun. Before we look at all these fragments though, I believe it's worth talking a little bit about Xivu Arath in general terms, for the uninitiated and for all our recollections. Xivu Arath is the sibling of Oryx and Savathun, but in the beginning the three siblings were smaller and more vulnerable. This is in the time eons ago when the Hive were known as the Krill, and when Xivu Arath had not yet assumed her mantle as the God of War. She was known as Zero, and her siblings were Sathona and Orash. After their kingdom was overthrown and their king father slain, these three royal offspring were forced into exile. Through the machinations of Rulk and the Witness, Sathona was given information by a dead worm familiar, information that implied that they should explore the deep oceans of their planet, Fundament. There they found the Witness's servants, the worm gods. In that moment they made a pact with these deep beings, gaining paracausal power and godlike status so long as they consumed the worm larvae of their new gods and would continuously feed them with death. Thus the Krill died, and the Hive were born from them. Zero would transform into Xivu Arath and would come to be the embodiment of the Hive's spirit of domination as their god of war. She was a mighty tactician and a terrifying adversary. When the War of the Ecumene was fought, she was the first to sacrifice herself to her brother, allowing him to take her power so that he might be able to find a way for the Hive to continue existing. Aurix would take this power, and the power that he also gained from killing Savathun, and would use it to take the secret of communing with the deep from Akka, the Worm of Secrets. Upon using this power, Aurix went into the deep and emerged as Oryx, the Taken King. When Oryx slew the Ecumene in war, he embodied war, and in doing so was able to bring his sister Xivu Arath back from death. Xivu would continue to fight by his side up until the Battle of the Giftmast, where she declared that his power was only serving to constrain her own, and that she needed time and space away from him in order to grow different. From here she left, and it's in this time between that Oryx would eventually collapse his forces into Sol, allowing us to kill him upon his dreadnought. As her forces and the forces of her sister converged upon Sol, it was clear that Xivu Arath perceived the power vacuum that existed in the hierarchy of the Hive after her brother's death. Oryx's death had left the position of Taken King empty, and we Guardians had not assumed the mantle. And so, Savathun first stole control of the Taken using Quaria, the Blade Transform, a Vex Mind that was able to perfectly simulate a version of Oryx the Taken King, thus allowing her control by proxy. Xivu found herself in the Witness's favor when it was clear that Savathun had turned traitor. Her real first impact on our story began here, with the death of Sagira, Osiris's ghost, just before the beginning of the Season of the Hunt. We drove her back, and her High Celebrant was killed during the Season of the Hunt. However, this would hardly be the last of Xivu's influence. Later in the Season of the Lost, as Savathûn was driven back and contained in the Dreaming City, Xivu Arath would claim control of the Taken, and would direct them ceaselessly as shock troops, going after her sister as well as the Awoken and Guardian forces that were compiling themselves in the Dreaming City, ready for Savathûn and her ritual that would separate her from her worm. This, of course, succeeded, and Xivu's forces, led by Kel'Garath, were pushed back. During the Season of the Seraph, Xivu's forces attempted to summon her massive armies freely to Earth via the act of war that was the unleashing of the Warsats. If these Warsats were used, it would be enough of an act of war to begin a ritual that would tear open the Ascendant Plane, allowing Xivu's Hive forces to descend upon Earth, and the Witness would finally be able to conquer Sol unchallenged and unchecked by Guardian forces. Of course, Rasputin's sacrifice prevented all of this, pushing the god of war back still further and preventing her ritual from being enacted. Now, in the Season of the Deep, Xivu Arath has emerged as the greatest lieutenant of the Witness and has made her loyalties clear as she fights against us. She's remained shrouded in a greater degree of mystery on a fairly consistent basis, only occasionally emerging from the shadows at key moments and junctures. Now though, we have the chance to learn more about her through these new calcified fragments. The first of these, however, harkens back to an ancient time in terms of both Destiny's universe and in terms of the Hive's history, a time when Xivu was not known as Xivu, a time when she was still Zero.
Lonely Navigator, we have traveled so long with only each other. I know you love to hear and speak new tongues. Come, sit in the Flesh Garden. I will read you these stories I bought at Kaharn.
This memory recounts a moment in the Books of Sorrow, when Zero reads to her siblings. This was a happier time. Before the corruption of Sathona was complete, before the Worm Familiar had tempted her down into the deep, before she decreed that they should dive deeper to find their salvation. The Kaharn that is mentioned in this entry is the city of Kaharn Atoll, the great fortress city at Fundament's center, where all of the different races upon Fundament's surface would gather in a sort of strange cosmopolitan metropolis. This same fortress city, however, would one day fall to Xivu and her conquering horde. The Flesh Gardens are referenced here as well, and they are a room within the Needle. The Needle was the ship that was discovered by Sathona, and it would one day be the ship that ferried her and her siblings down into the depths to find the Worm Gods. The Flesh Gardens were a room that, well, quite literally were filled with flesh and were formulated as gardens. Probably very Geiger-esque, but the point is that it was one of the few rooms that truly unsettled the siblings at first, and it was a place at which they would sit eventually and hear stories. The second of Xivu's memories, captured in the calcified fragments, talks of what it was like when this happy time had passed, and when the Pact of the Deep had been made. It speaks of the moment when this pact was made.
I was Zero. I was weakness, fragility. Then you drowned me in the deep, murdered my flaws. You are our navigator, our guide. Led me down the bladed path to be reforged as Xivu Arath. I will remember you. Our navigator. Our brother. Our king. In this, you are eternal.
This was when the Krill began to transform into the Hive. This is when, eventually, we would start to see the rise of the Taken King, the Hive God of lies and deception, and the Hive God of war. The Taken King, of course, at the time being, was simply Ulrix the Navigator, the King Morph, and the leader of the Krill, who would one day be known as the Hive. But even in this moment, it's entirely clear that Xivu was thankful for the transformation that was negotiated by her brother. This is a moment where she sees herself first undergoing the true change that was brought about by the sword logic. She was able to slough away a weaker version of herself. and become sharper, greater, something more. She says as much in the third memory.
I remember the languid contempt of our father, the cold eyes of our mother. I see your determination eternal. It is determination that defines you. Certainty, clarity, faith. Your will is a knife, hewing away at our lies. You are truth. When I doubt, you never spare me the blade. When I falter, you never spare me your words, and yet I know there is more.
Xivu here demonstrates what her entire early life was, up until perhaps 10, 20, 30 years ago. Xivu here demonstrates a sort of faith in her brother, partly because of his determination, but also because of what he wields, the sword logic. There is certainty in the way that he cuts away at the lies of weakness that Xivu speaks of. There is, however, equal certainty in the blade that was used to cut those lies. The sword logic itself, the decree that weakness should be stripped away from the universe, and only that which is strong should remain. This is the central tenet of the Hive, and it is their interpretation of the final shape. Of course, Oryx's blades and supposed truths were not enough to conquer us. When we slew the Taken King almost 10 years ago, it was noted by Toland the Shattered that we had not replaced him, as was the architecture of these Ascendant Hive spaces. We did not abide by the sword logic, and whilst it may have frustrated Toland, who still calls us Squanderer for this act, it utterly enraged Xivu Arath.
You are dead. Your throne waits empty. Blasphemy. Blasphemy! My brother is vanquished. Court scattered. Temples ransacked. My brother is dead, and his killers have not assumed the mantle of the Taken King. Blasphemy! Blasphemy! How can the spear that pierced 1,000,000 worlds be killed by those who would deny the all-edged truth? Mother, are you laughing? Sister, are you smiling? Is this the fate worse than extinction? Was it all for nothing?
It is blasphemy against the sword logic to defy it. To topple the king but not to claim his power is to challenge the worldview of the Hive utterly. Not only this, but we slew Oryx with light, not darkness. It rebukes everything that the Hive believe it to be true. In this moment, it's clear that Xivu's own faith has been challenged, and its certainty is no more. For the first time in her existence, the thing that she has taken for granted her entire life is challenged. Her only resort is that of rage. Eventually, though, she would find resolve in this rage, and she would believe that even in death, Oryx's truth, the truth of the sword logic, was not truly invalidated. So long as she was still strong, so long as strength still defeated those that had defeated Oryx, the truth of their faith was still intact.
I have died, and yet was summoned back by you. You who remembered me as war. Our sister died and was summoned back by you. You who conspired with her cunning. So it must be for now. If your legacy is true, brother, it will come onto us and defeat our blasphemy. And if not, what we attempt cannot be blasphemy. For we have survived you, surpassed the power of your will. Hayat.
Only strengthening Xivu's conviction, Xivu saw the weakness presented by the Traveler and the Light, and she also makes commentary about wings here. This was a signature characteristic of Oryx in his time of darkness, in the moments when he was truly ascending to Taken King. It means that we can also assume something now about Xivu's physical appearance, as she has clearly taken up these wings of her own. Before, it doesn't seem like she had them at all. It'll be interesting to see if that is a physical change that she's brought upon herself.
The sky is fragile, flawed, lies, lies. I see how easily it is chained, brought to the heel and muzzled. The truth cannot so easily be bound. You showed us that. Truth has wings. I take flight in your stead. I bring the knife of truth to the gristle of lies.
All of this resolve found new purchase in a gift from her sister Savathun, the last gift that she might ever send her. The gift was the world of Tora Bartle, a world built to honor war, the homeworld of the Cabal. It was Keitel's blade that struck the blow that would open the way, and with it, Xivu Arath would bring forward the power of the sword logic to these new peoples. Perhaps in this moment, her faith was beginning to feel unchallenged yet again.
You would have savored my triumph. How our sister's gift to me was treated with such care. Screams like a choir as their mountains trembled. Screams like a choir as their seas boiled. I stepped down into that world, thrust my sword into the heart of Torabottle, and carved lies from truth.
Having been gifted the conquest of Tora Bartle by her sister, it was perhaps only her sister who could dislodge her faith now. Only the movements of Savathun could bring enough tumult about to adequately change the course of Xivu's life and faith. And of course, Savathun's decision to betray the darkness, embrace the light, and become a light bearer, well, that was more than enough to bring about Xivu's fury. Where before we had been called blasphemers, Xivu would call her own sister a heretic.
Heresy! Heresy! Our sister denies your truth and crawls like an animal into the shadow of the sky. She bleats and howls, allowing herself to be profaned by it. She spits on your memory. Sister, you always doubted. But now it is time to test theory in praxis.
Xivu's determination to be correct was now something that was enforcing the way in which she lived. She needed to embrace all that the sword logic was to free herself from doubt, and yet it still wasn't entirely possible. However, she would resolve to continue to be warlike, and in this way, she would continue to plot and plan and strategize, and this meant that many times we would factor into those plans. Take a listen.
Sometimes to win a battle, you needn't raise a hand. You let the ignorant fight in your name, unknowing. They move themselves into position, posturing their victories, leaving their soft flank open. Sister, I spit on your grave. You were wrong.
I believe that in this instance, the ignorant that fight in her name, that means us. Not only in this moment when racing towards the sunken Lucent Hive ship, but also in our time assaulting the Witch Queen in her own throne world. Xivu is a master tactician and understands that you need not necessarily fight an enemy and strike until their flank is exposed. She understands that she doesn't need to waste her own strength when it might be put better to use in the correct moment. The moment when we have killed Savathun perhaps, and in that moment weakened ourselves. This still kills us, this still proves our own strength through stratagem and might and war, and thus the creed of the sword logic is still satisfied. Xivu's resolve appears to have been rewarded by the witness's victory. The next memory speaks of how once again the sword logic's truth seems to ring true. with the moment of the final shape being so imminent.
There is an end in sight now, clearer than I have ever seen it. The horizon narrows down to a single edge, sharper than hope. I see the final shape coming into focus in this cutting motion, and the deep sings its promises. I crack my whip unto the rhythm. I guide your knife in between ribs. Even now, alone, you are my navigator.
Guardian down.
Xivu's fervent belief in the final shape may seem resolute, but she, too, feels something. Doubt has crept into her mind as she has suffered several defeats at our own hands. These defeats weigh upon her heavily, and there is only one thing that brings her peace: the idea that our destruction and the failure of the Traveler is imminent.
The sky's liars are eloquent in their tenacity. They make me doubt my own hand, my own right. Our blades clash, and I am driven back. I had my blade in their throat, and they slipped past my guard. But it is too late now. Even their deepest cuts are too shallow to kill. I see the final shape coming for their heart.
This doubt is something that will eat at Xivu. It is something that makes her doubt her truth even as the witness's victory seems imminent. The final shape will be her deliverance, even if she is shaken to her core. Xivu here states that the final shape is coming for their heart. I believe that this is in reference to whatever the witness seeks beyond the portal that it has created in the side of the Traveler, implying that Xivu perhaps understands some of the witness's plans and how its victory might be achieved, although it would be beyond reasonable for me to confirm that, given that many of the disciples are seemingly being left in the dark as to the true nature of the final shape, allowing their own wild interpretations to run rampant. The final memory here is collected after we defeat the forces of the Lucent Hive and prevent Oryx from being resurrected as a Hive Guardian. In these moments, Xivu says her final goodbye to her brother. It is filled with sadness and reeks of something more.
I come to you now to say goodbye, brother. This will be my last visitation. A final knee at your grave. I'm left to wonder if there's anything of you still in there. I am left to wonder, what is this feeling? The sky is mortally wounded, bleeding out. Yet, a part of me longs for the comfort of the gardens, of your stories, of sisters. I long for our journeys together. But no, they have come to an end. We will be proven right. You will be proven right. Brother, if you have taught me anything, it was to never deny a truth, even when it grieves us. What is this feeling? I do not want it.
If doubt has already crept into Xivu's mind, perhaps the thing she feels is loss or regret. The Hive have sung a lie to themselves that has spun sorrow into beauty. It is easy for them to accept when the sorrow they create is inflicted upon their victims who die shortly after being invaded by these monstrous beings. But in this moment, having seen death, blasphemy, heresy, and betrayal, Xivu's doubt has begun to change her. I think now the real question is this. If shown that the truth she has followed all her life is based on a lie, as we know it is, will she accept that the world is not as she has seen it for millennia? Or will she continue to abide by the way of the sword and cling to the logic that leaves her as a servant of the witness? What is this feeling that she feels? Loss. Regret. Sorrow, perhaps. Doubt. Only time will tell. But if these logs have told us one thing already, it's this. Even the god of war has an Achilles heel, and that Achilles heel is her family. That's all from me for now. I hope you enjoyed the video. Look out for more lore from the dungeon in the next few weeks. There is a lot to talk about and a lot to cover, but this was clearly the most pressing thing to talk about at the very, very beginning of it all. You'll also find some more marathon lore from me on the channel. In the next few weeks we'll be starting that up. I'm going to try and do something along the lines of Marathon Mondays. Who knows what happens on that front, but it'll be nice to get a regular lore series going so that we can keep everybody up to date. I don't plan on doing as much lore and news coverage, more sort of lore coverage, and if it is relevant, and we do get narrative beats from everything every once in a while, then yeah, we can maybe look into that. Of course, if you want all of that, again, the subscribe button is right there, as is the like button, and you can leave your own thoughts in the comments down below. But as per usual, know that your viewership, as always, is quite enough for me, and that in the meantime, my name is Byf. Rhodacia ad Astra. I'll see you, Starside.